Going in 3, 2, 1. Welcome. Oh, wait, hold on. All of a sudden I was like, I don't even know how I start.
Welcome!
It's like that muscle memory thing where if I don't think about it, I can just go right into it. But the second I actually think about it, then I like, no, that's wrong. No, there's no right way. Oh, man.
It's the best opening.
All right, let's try that again. Going in 3, 2, 1.
Let's go.
Let's go.
Oh, did you want to?
Sorry, I'll let you.
Next one.
I'm in love with you.
Snap out of it.
I'll have what she's having.
Too many guys think I'm a concept, or I complete them, or I'm gonna make them alive. But I'm just a fucked up girl who's looking for my own peace of mind. Don't assign me yours.
Caustic wit is my religion.
I would make a great queen because I am so stubborn.
I say when it comes to stardom and Lauren, there are no accidents.
Hi, Karen Peterson.
Welcome to Citizen Dame, the podcast where we try in vain to help men understand how to actually be allies and not just think that they are, but it doesn't always work out. Anyway, I'm Karen Peterson, and I am joined as always by Lauren Humphreys-Brooks.
Welcome.
Hi.
Hello. I'm sorry. I'm still giggling.
I love it.
Hello. How are you doing, Karen?
I was fine until about 10 seconds before we were going to start recording, and I saw a tweet that just made me just...
It just like threw everything off. It was just like, oh, we're going to do that today, are we?
Yeah. We're not going to talk about the specific tweet here right now, because I don't want to give this person a shout out of any kind, but I mean, if you go on Twitter, you can see what's happening if you just look at Saturday morning. But the point is, someone wrote a tweet that we believe was a very well-intentioned tweet about supporting films with female leads, but it was also an extremely limiting perspective, and it just makes me sad when people just are so clueless and they really are just so insistent that they're not. Because now he's trying to argue with us about why he's right about female representation and we're wrong. So that's always fun.
I mean, I think there's a general rule of thumb with men that, like, if a woman, and particularly if multiple women, say to you, no, you're not getting it when you're talking about female representation or feminism, things like that, maybe take that to heart. Maybe be like, maybe I'm not getting it, because if women are telling you you're not, you might not be the best feminist in this particular area. Like, it's not saying you're always wrong or anything like that, or that women are always right, but, just kind of think about that a little bit.
Exactly. And again, we acknowledge that this is probably a person that means well and is just not quite there on this, and it's not the first time that we've had a little bit of a sparring match with this particular person, but
this happens a lot. I mean, you have to say, just spinning out from just the one individual, right? It happens a lot where basically you get men saying, like, no, that's incorrect. No, that's not feminism. It's like, or my favorite is, that's not a woman's experience.
Yeah.
And that one is just like, okay, dude, cisgender man, how the fuck would you know? Like, how would you know that is not a woman's experience? That's never happened to a woman. It's like, I'm pretty positive that I would have a better idea about female experience than you. Just saying.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, so that's what happened right before we were about to start recording, so that's why we're a little giggly, because we're just like, I can't, like, because you either have to laugh or cry at these situations, and
yes,
we're choosing to laugh because it's Saturday morning, and it's, it's been a good week, and hopefully, I don't know, has it been a good week for you?
It's been all right. I've had some weird interactions with men, but yeah, just fine. Just kind of like, all right, well, I'm gonna move on now.
Tell me more, Liz. Tell me more.
I did get an apology, by the way, about
Oh,
that. So that was good. That was good. That was just, it was someone who'd made an error, and so fair enough. Everything. It's always a bit odd when someone's like, that's not my name. Someone referred to me by a name that is not mine, and even though they should know my name, but yeah. So I did get an apology. So that's all good. No harm, no foul.
That is good. I teach a class at church once a month, and when people, want to answer a question and they raise their hand, I always, I've known all these folks for years. I know everyone really well, but I always freak out that I'm gonna call them the wrong name, so then I just end up pointing at them, which is, I think, more awkward. But it's I know them, but I don't want to say the wrong name in front of everyone, so...
There have been a few people in my life that I have persistently, accidentally, to be honest, called them the wrong name, and it's always been a problem. One of my closest friends in college, I did not know her name for weeks, and it reached the point where we had spent enough time together that I couldn't ask her name. I couldn't be hey, I'm sorry, we've hung out, we've we're friends now, but I have no idea what your actual name is. And so I finally had to ask other people who were living in our hall. It's just okay, that girl, what's her name? It's
that girl I've been spending all my time with?
Yeah, it's just aren't you guys friends? Just yes, I just can't remember her name, I'm sorry.
Yeah, anyway, names are hard.
Names are hard. That's true.
Anyway. All right. Well, we have a really fun conversation today about genre. But before we get into that, we want to finally get around to Mason's question. We're so sorry that we didn't get to this sooner. And honestly, I wish that we had been able to see it and ask it the week that you originally asked it answer it because it fit in with that conversation that we were having because it was the week of the Paul Schrader, Martin Scorsese Taxi Driver discussion. But anyway, we're going to talk about it now. So this is from @MasonMumbles. Do you think any famous directors would benefit from directing a movie they didn't write? Like Yorgos Lanthimos in The Favorite. I sometimes think Christopher Nolan films would be better if he wasn't working with his own screenplays. Yeah. I was going to say, I would say most directors would benefit from directing a movie they didn't write. At least, not every time, but at least for the experience of it. So, that's my very broad answer. I'll get a little more specific in a minute. But, Lauren, what do you say?
Yeah, definitely. I think that it's interesting because I tend to not pay attention sometimes to the difference between screenplays and the director. I didn't realize that The Favorite was one that he hadn't written, but it's actually written by at least by one woman, Deborah Davis, which is interesting because it's the only Yorgos Lanthimos film that I've actually enjoyed. Which is not to say I appreciate his directing style. I appreciate what he's trying to do with his films. They're just not for me. They're not films that connect with me, right? But I really love The Favorite, and I think it's interesting that this was a film that he actually didn't write. So yeah, I would agree with that. I think that a lot of the time directors who are also writers get too close to their work. There's because it's kind of like writing and editing your own manuscript sometimes, that you're not having that connection with another person in trying to shape whatever it is that you're doing. So if you're solely writing and directing your own scripts, there maybe is a continuum there that you could kind of get, but you don't get that combination of writer and director that can really produce sparks. And I think that that's one of the things that happened with Taxi Driver. Where does Schrader end and Scorsese begin? It doesn't really, because it's a collaboration. So
yeah, exactly. Well, yeah, one of the big things I think is that when directors are working with a screenwriter and not themselves, and I think even if it's a co-writing situation where they have someone helping with the screenplay, I think can also be beneficial. But But just getting the director a little bit of distance from the story, I think can be really beneficial. And I think especially if a director has, either if they're early in their career or if they have kind of been spinning their wheels a bit and their films are starting to feel the same all the time, or too similar at least, I think that stepping outside of that role, getting themselves a little bit of distance from the story, hearing another person's perspective on a story can really be beneficial. Getting a writer in there who just has a different view of or approach to a theme, to an idea, to a concept can really just elevate it. I would love to see Paul Thomas Anderson direct someone else's work, you know?
Yeah.
I think that I think honestly, any writer director, I think should at least try this at some point for some variety, for just stretching themselves a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. So I just thought of this, but Orson Welles, I think every single one of the films that he directed, he also wrote. And if you note the trajectory of Orson Welles' career, he has some really great films, but they fall off in quality fairly quickly. And some of that is because of the issues that he has as a director, the issues that he had with producers and studios and everything. But you know, he's credited as screenwriter. Of course, we saw Mank. Everybody argues about Citizen Kane, but he's credited as screenwriter, I think, on all of the films that he directed. And you can tell. I mean, you can tell that he's a very egotistical director. I think he's a great director in a lot of ways. But you could sort of tell that he's, you know, kind of in love with his own language and in love with his own scripts and screenplays and everything. And I don't think that always helps. I don't think that that's always something that, you know, it contributes to the film. And it would have been interesting to see what he could have done with working, you know, in tandem with another screenwriter, more so than, you know, I don't know how much to take Mank as gospel truth, right? But definitely Wells, I think, probably needed that, even if it would just be to cut down his own ego a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. So yes, I think that there are lots of directors who could benefit from that. I think all of them could. So,
definitely.
Yeah. Any other thoughts on that?
I don't know about Christopher Nolan. I mean, I have many issues with Christopher Nolan, not least the ones that have come up recently again. But I mean, I think it would be I think it would be interesting to see. Like I say, Yorgos Lanthimos, Until the Favorite, didn't really speak to me, and I really liked that film. And so that it might be because, you know, maybe it's just that sense of stepping outside of your comfort zone, and not. You know, trying to work on something that's a different genre than what you usually do, or a different style of writing, different style of dialogue, you know, all kinds of things. You kind of get that collaborative element going. Mm-hmm.
I think the biggest thing is the collaboration. I think that when directors, kind of what you were just saying, when directors are too close to the material because they've been there from the beginning, like from concepts through the screenplay writing process to actually sitting down and directing the film, I think that there is an ownership there that is good, but it can be limiting, and it can make them just too attached to certain things, and so then it's difficult for them to know where to kill their darlings, so to speak.
Yeah, exactly. You and particularly when you're talking about directors that are very successful. Yeah, they don't have that opportunity to, you know, question their own decision-making process, question what they're doing, and to actually be like, oh, you know, maybe I need to approach this in a way that is not immediately comfortable to me, is not my immediate go-to spot, but is something that I actually need to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, so we're going to talk today about genre, and I think that before we get into some of the specifics of genre, I think it's important to talk about why genre matters and why it's important for us to understand it in this, you know, continuing this conversation of film criticism and what film criticism really is about and what it is there to accomplish. So Lauren, for you, why does it matter to understand genre and as it relates to film criticism?
I think because it's really one of the only ways to approach certain films, because we've seen it a lot, you know, where a critic says, you know, and we've seen particularly with horror, as we were talking a little bit last week, a film critic starts out by saying, I don't like horror films. And here's why I didn't like this horror film. And I'm not necessarily, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's wrong, but there's definitely a need to appreciate and understand genre. I've read critics before who have talked about action movies, right? So, you know, the Expendables, as though they're supposed to be art films. And it's like, okay, but those are two very different things, right? What the films are, I think it comes down to, what are the films intended to do? What is their meaning, right? Is it to, you know, I think always at a certain level it's to entertain, right? Particularly when you're talking about more mainstream films, about budgeted films, et cetera. But, you know, what are they trying to accomplish? Are they doing, you know, we talked about slashers, are they doing kind of by the numbers slasher? Are they doing something different with the slasher? You know, in order to understand subversion of conventions, you have to understand the conventions to begin with, and you have to understand whether or not that works. So I think that as critics, you know, when you're approaching a film, you have to approach films in different lights and be like, you know, this film is intended to behave in a certain way. It's intended to be in this genre. And this is why it works and this is why it doesn't. This is why it subverts the genre. This is why it doesn't. This is what that means. So that we're not simply approaching it as all films are exactly the same. You know, you're on a level playing field, but you're actually coming to meet them at the point that they're at. So, you know, we're not expecting a Western to involve aliens, right? Or maybe we are. I don't know.
I mean, cowboys and aliens.
Yes, that is true. And, you know, when we talk about space Westerns and space operas and things like that, you know, so and that's the other thing, is to be able to introduce generic conventions into other genres. And that's where you get mashup genres. That's where you get this kind of interesting combination of this interesting pastiche of different genres. That's one of the things that we were talking about when we talked about *Malignant* last week. This kind of combining of aesthetics and images and expectations into something kind of new and different and fun, but also recognizable. And that's one of the things that we have to be able to understand, I think, as critics, is to go into this being like, this is what this film is supposed to be, right? So does it succeed at being that, or does it fail?
Yeah. I think that, you know, we hear a lot of people say like, oh, this movie is really predictable. And that's where it's like, okay, I need to pull back. Was it predictable, or does it just fit in with certain patterns established by genre that make it where it's following a certain course, you know? Like, is it fitting in with other films that are similar, or is it truly just like, oh my gosh, so predictable? You know, we have to be able to understand the difference when we're writing about film. It's, you know, that's not something that necessarily will matter as much to someone who just enjoys watching films and just wants to know what movies are good and bad. But when you're really trying to break down and critically analyze a movie, and like what you're saying, where it works and where it doesn't, where it successfully subverts expectations and where it just charges full steam ahead and does exactly what is expected of it, you need to understand how genres work, and how they don't. So. Yeah.
Well, and I think a good example is some of the different critical reactions to Knives Out, and some of the commentary. And there were obviously a lot of people who were just like, do you know what a whodunit is? Because I'm not certain if you do. But so one of the things that I think Knives Out did very well, and people can disagree with me on it, obviously, but is to take kind of the concept of the old manor house whodunit, which is what it is. It's very Agatha Christie. It references Agatha Christie quite explicitly. And play with that, right? So it's playing within this genre, and it is subverting expectation. It is making, also using commentary on the inherent racism and classism of the whodunit, particularly as done by Agatha Christie, or Dorothy Sayers, right, who were writing in the 1930s primarily. That's when the most famous ones were. And so that film like kind of takes some of those tropes and concepts and structure and then does something different with it and ultimately creates something that, as a avid reader of whodunit, someone who loves Agatha Christie, I was like, well, I kind of should have expected some of this. I definitely expect a twist, but I didn't really know where it was going, how it was going to come out in the end. And that's what makes it work.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think that as we go into this conversation, I think that we need to talk about what genre is,
yeah,
and how we break that down. So, like, I was doing some reading in the last couple weeks actually about this topic, and watching some the great courses. If you have access to Canopy, you can watch great courses for free, which is awesome. So I was watching this one that was specifically about genre, just for like a general overview. And it was saying that there are 11 super genres. And I was like, okay, that's cool. We can talk about if this is still really, if this really encompasses everything. But basically, the 11 super genres, they say, are action, crime, fantasy, horror, life, romance, sci-fi, sports, thriller, war, and western. And I think that we can have a discussion over whether, like, superhero has become its own genre or if that fits into one of these, like if it's sci-fi or fantasy or something else. Because I have some thoughts on that, but basically that's what it comes down to. So every film pretty much fits into one of these 11 super genres, but then you break it down from there. So then you've got macro genres, which, like, okay, if it's a western, is that a modern day western? Is it like the old west? Is it another country? Those kinds of things. So there's like macros, and then there are micro genres, which really get into like for crime film, for example, you could have a heist movie, but then is it a procedural heist movie? That kind of thing. So let's start there.
So I think that seems to be a pretty good breakdown about that. I think that then you get into the issue of mashup genre. Mm-hmm. And so like you say, a superhero movie. Okay, well, it's an action movie. It can also be a thriller, or it can be. I think one of the interesting examples, and I hesitate to bring this up because oh my god, but the Army of the Dead, Zack Snyder's mm-hmm. Army of the Dead, which is a heist movie mashed with a zombie film, right? So you've got,
so it's a crime movie and a sci-fi.
And a horror film,
and a
right?
horror.
Right. So, well, and that's the other thing. So sci-fi and horror. So you've got Alien, right? Which mm-hmm. is definitely a sci-fi movie. It takes place in space in the future at some point. But it is also a horror film, and it has a lot of the trappings of kind of a haunted house or a monster movie. And so you do, or even a slasher, right? So we talked about how I would call Jaws a slasher movie. Mm-hmm. But it's also an action film, really. It's a mystery. There are all of those kind of permutations that wind up, so saying like, so how do we categorize these different films? And ultimately, what we're talking about is that definitely a lot of these establish certain expectations, audience expectations. A horror movie, when you go into a horror movie, you're expecting horror, right, of some form. You're expecting a monster, a killer, a mystery, maybe a ghost, a haunted house, something supernatural, something paranormal, maybe something more actually human, but still not very heavy on action or fight scenes or anything like that.
Yeah. So the super genre, well, all genres just give you an idea of what to expect from the film, and I think that this is where it's really important for writers, for people who are writing the films, but also especially people who are critically analyzing them to understand this, because then it really helps to dissect, does this work? Like what we were talking about before. So if you're watching a movie like, I'm trying to think of one right now, like Shang-Chi, which is still out in theaters, and it's really good. And that's a superhero movie. Again, we can talk about which, like, does that have its own super genre, or is that an action movie first, or a fantasy movie? I would argue that it's both of those. But then what does it do? You know, so then it goes into its, you know, what are the macro genres that would be related to those? If we're going to say that superhero is not a super genre, it could be a macro genre. And then you go down from there. So it's like you're just drilling down more and more to understand what the film is trying to accomplish and what it actually does accomplish. So a movie like Shang-Chi, which is an origin story, and it's also heist isn't, no, it's not a heist. It's I don't know. Anyway, like, basically it comes down to trying to protect a group of people, or in this case, really the whole world, from something catastrophic. And there are moments throughout the film that will pull from other micro and macro genres too. So you end up with like a chase scene, which, you know, that's pretty common element in crime movies, or you know, really cool fight scenes that have a lot of fantasy element to them, that kind of thing. So, but you have to be able to understand those elements. So
yeah, we come into, I think most films, we come into expectations about what they are going to be. Right. This is going to fall into a broad genre. This is going to do something, right? And so with superhero films, we come into those films with certain expectations. We're going to get a superpowered individual of some kind. Their superpower is either, you know, super normal in some way, or it is, you know, something that they obtain through training, etc. So you do have even permutations within the superhero genre of people like Superman, right, who are from another planet and are like literally have superhuman abilities, or someone like more like Black Widow, who is basically a trained assassin, right? That's what she's supposed to be. So her abilities are not superpowered in any sense,
right?
And so then you get permutations within that. But we definitely go into superhero movies with particular expectations, particular beats, plot beats that we think they're going to hit. Like you're saying, if you're talking about an origin story versus something that's a sequel, or kind of a building of character relationships, you know, the Avengers or something like that. But with an origin story, we're going to expect to meet someone who is, for all intents and purposes, normal, right? And then becomes the superhero by the end of the film.
Yeah. So, like, when someone's trying to describe a movie and they say, oh, it's like this meets that, and they're naming a couple of different movies that are similar, it's really not necessarily that the film is like those movies. It's really trying to describe the genre elements of it.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and I think the genre sometimes comes to you know, I know it when I see it kind of thing, you know, and certain genres are definitely easier to pinpoint in a lot of ways than others. So the Western, right, is very easy to pinpoint for the most part. You know, so when you get John Wayne riding on a horse in the American West, that is a Western. You know that it's going to be a Western, right? What happens in the film is not necessarily exactly what we expect from a Western, but that's definitely the genre that it's occupying. But others are much broader. I mean, if you say what's a horror film, right? A horror film has all kinds of things. What's an action film? Right. You know, what's a fantasy film? Well, you know, Lord of the Rings is definitely fantasy, but it's also action. But it's not an action movie. It's not an action movie in the way that we talk about like Arnold Schwarzenegger films.
Right. Yeah, and that's where you do get that blend of genres. And so you have to understand what each one is trying to accomplish. Like, what is the main, what are the main characteristics, I guess, of the genres? So, like, for a crime movie, for example, there's so many different ways that can work, but the center of it is that it's something to do with a crime. But is that a movie where the cops are trying to stop the bad guys? Is it about a hard-boiled detective who's trying to, reclaim his career or whatever, or solve one last case? Is it some people who you're on their side, they're the anti-heroes, and you're trying to, they're trying to get away with something? Is it someone trying to escape from something that they were, someone in prison, like in the Shawshank Redemption, where he's in prison wrongfully and he needs to escape, that kind of thing. So there's lots of different ways to break down any one of these super genres. So, with a war movie, who are the good guys? Who are the bad guys? What war are we even talking about? Does it have to be the kind where we're fighting with, swords or guns? Or can it be about, wars like the little guy going against Big Pharma or something like that? There's lots of ways to break that down, where you're looking at sort of the main conventions and using that to really understand the story that the filmmakers are trying to tell.
Yeah, and we're all conditioned to expect certain things out of these movies, and that's what the films kind of play with and set up for us, right? So for the crime film, we expect crime in some manner, right? Whether that is organized crime, like a gangster movie or a mafia film, or whether it's a police procedural, so we're on the side of law and order, right? We're on the side of whether it's a heist film, we're on the side of the thieves. And whether it's, even within that, is it a cat and mouse game where you're kind of on both sides, where you see the perspective of the police officer, the detective, or whoever, and you also see the side of the thief, the killer, whoever is doing that, and you kind of watch them sort of come together. So we're conditioned to expect certain things, and that's where then the filmmakers and the storytellers can subvert our expectations and actually be like, you thought that that's what was going on, but it actually isn't. Or you thought this guy was a good guy, and he actually wasn't. He was on the side of the villains, But then we even get conditioned to begin to expect that. That's one of the problems, I think, that we're running into a lot with crime films and horror films, particularly right now, is that we're conditioned at this moment to expect a twist. Right? We're like, okay, we think that this is doing one thing, but it's actually doing something different. And so, going back to our discussion of Malignant, I think that is a film where you go into it, you're like, okay, I expect for there to be something that is revealed at the end of all of this. The question becomes, does the film do a good job at setting up for that reveal? Does it make sense, right? Or is it just kind of out of the blue? It's like, wait a minute, that doesn't work, right? Or does it actually, does it work, and it's something that surprises you? I will say that when it came to Malignant, I was surprised. Yeah. But part of the reason why I was surprised was not so much that I didn't expect the twist to come. I knew that the twist was coming, but I didn't expect the twist to take the particular form that it did, and for it to go as far as it did, right? And that's one of the things that I think made that film very successful for me as a viewer and as a critic, that I consider myself to be someone that knows, I know a lot about horror films. I've seen a lot of horror films. I know what to expect from some of this. And it gave me what I was expecting, but then also more than that. Right. And that's what makes it successful.
Yeah, exactly. So you just watched Candyman. Yay.
Yes.
Finally.
Yeah.
So, Candyman, we could talk more about Malignant because that movie's crazy and awesome and people should watch it. But also, we had a little bit of a good discussion last night after you saw Nia DaCosta's Candyman. So what would you say with that one about how it fits into the horror genre?
Well, I think what's so great about that film is that first of all, it's already got a lot of baggage attached to it because it's basically a straight sequel to the '92 film, right, which is based on a horror story.
Yeah.
And you've got this narrative, this urban legend, basically that is building up around the concept of Candyman, right? And what I really liked about Nia DaCosta's film is that it didn't disregard its predecessor. It didn't say, like, we're going to completely rewrite all of that, but we're actually going to take all of it and kind of bring it into 2021. We're going to bring it into, and we're also going to tell this from the perspective not of the white woman who is being persecuted, but from the perspective of a Black man who is kind of investigating all of this and trying to come to terms with the racial violence that was done to Candyman, because that's part of the basis of the Candyman story, right? And so I think that what really makes that film work is that it takes all of these trappings of the horror genre. So, we even talked about it, the concept of urban legends and the stories that we tell about these various figures. So Candyman already has all of this cultural baggage that is attached to it, even like right when the film gets made, right? So the speaking in the mirror, all of those things, we recognize that immediately. We're like, okay, I know what genre this is. And then you kind of take that, Nia DaCosta took that and went beyond it and said, like, okay, we're going to flip this around. And rather than this being a white perspective on a Black issue, this is going to be a Black perspective on a Black issue. And still doing all of those tropes and using all of the things that we are conditioned to expect from a Candyman film generally, from a horror film, from a slasher movie, and going further with it and being like, we're going to turn this around, we're going to look at it from a different perspective, and we're going to treat it differently. So it's this interesting subversion of monstrosity, of the effect that trauma and monstrosity has on communities, has on individuals. And it's really doing something different, I think, with the horror genre, because it's not taking the mainstream perspective. And by mainstream, I mean the white, acceptable perspective that horror is so often told from.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe I just rambled there. But...
No, not at all. No, I mean, I don't have a lot to add because I agree with what you just said. And I think that it's, it's funny because on my other podcast, we actually reviewed Candyman. And my co-host Eric on that show, he had told me one point that he's not really into horror films, that he's too big of a scaredy cat. He might not have used those exact words, but that was the implication. And so, but then when I asked him, like, how hard would it be to convince you that we should do Candyman when that comes out? And he was just like, oh no, I'm definitely seeing that. We're gonna review that. I'm like, okay, great. So then I've been trying to really understand where he stands when it comes to horror films, because some he's all about, like, he saw The Night House too, and he loved that. And so I'm just like, okay, wait, I don't understand when you are willing to watch a horror movie and when you're not, and what you like and what you don't. And when we were talking about Candyman specifically, I had described it as a movie that is really not scary, that it's horrifying more than scary. And he was just like, yeah, that's it. And I was like, I don't know if I really explained anything with that description, but my thing with Candyman specifically is that it really does do such a good, effective job at introducing the horror elements of this story, and of this legend of Candyman, and how that takes over this man's life and ultimately this woman's life too, without ever actually becoming like a really scary movie. There are times when I'm watching certain films and I have to look away. I have to hide behind my eyes or behind my hands, because I'm just like, oh, I'm too scared. I can't look at this because I don't like to be startled. But with Candyman, I was able to just sit and watch the whole thing because I was never afraid of, like, jump scares for the sake of just making your heart jolt or whatever. It's more just the fascinating process of watching this story unfold. And I think that that's where this film is, obviously it's a horror film, but it really has some elements that make it a really interesting life story too, and a history, and a little bit of fantasy as well. So it's blending a lot of things together, and that's why it works so well.
Yeah, it's interesting because one of the things that a few people have pointed out, I think I happened to watch this movie at the same time that there was like a live tweet going on Twitter, so I did not.
Was a coincidence? I thought you did that on purpose.
No, not at all. I had happened to notice because I'd wanted to see it that it was available to rent finally, and I was like, oh, I really want to rent it. And so I wasn't on Twitter during the entire film because I wasn't going to do that. But then I went on. I was like, oh my god, everyone's talking about this movie that I just saw. But one of the things that I found kind of interesting was, and it was something that you pointed out, and a couple of people pointed out on Twitter, was that you never actually see the murders, right? Mm-hmm. You don't, and so. And so you're never seeing, as you pointed out, a black man killing people, right? Yeah. Primarily, by the way, white people.
Right.
And that's it's so powerful because Candyman is kind of turned into this eruption of racial trauma, right? That's really what he represents. And it isn't this physical monster, right, in the same way that it is in that he is in the original 92 film, but this like literal invisible force at times. The other thing that someone pointed out, and I wish I could find the tweet that did, but talked about the scene where the group of girls says Candyman into the mirror, right? Mm-hmm. They're tempting fate. They're tempting this, like, you know, a lot of the film deals with this idea that, you know, you don't want to say it. You know, there are a number of characters that are just like, no, I'm not going to say it. No, don't do that. You know, and there's a little bit of a joke with people being willing to say it, not willing to say it. But then, so this group of girls is like kind of tempting fate. They're playing the game, right? Which is what the story kind of inspires you to do. But the entire murder sequence is actually filmed from inside a bathroom stall.
Yeah.
From the perspective of a black girl who is inside the stall and wasn't part of this at all. She just happens to come into the bathroom at the wrong time. Mm-hmm. And it's really interesting because one of the things that someone on Twitter pointed out was that this is in some ways also representing the way that kind of white hubris winds up damaging black people. Right, winds up. So this is a game to these other girls, but it's not a game to her because she's the one who witnesses, who experiences their deaths. Yeah. And she is the one that is going to be traumatized as a result of it. So, it's a really interesting dynamic that I think the film builds, is this question of trauma, and of trauma being constantly visited on, in this case, it's specifically talking about the Black community, by the hubris and the behavior of white people. Yeah. So that kind of goes off of what we were talking about in terms of genre, but that was just something that, like, since we're talking about Candyman, I was like, that is a very good point.
Mm-hmm. But when you're gonna write about a film like Candyman or speak about it in an intellectual conversation, you have to understand how horror works, what the precepts of horror are, and how this falls into those, but also where it differentiates itself. And I think that's a perfect example of what we're talking about here.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, when it comes to horror, I've said before, this question of the return of the repressed, which is a pretty acceptable viewing of the way that horror works. Very often the monster is representative of some type of repression. For a long time, that repression has been represented from the perspective of the mainstream, right? Which is usually white, usually heterosexual, usually cisgender, all of those. So that the monstrosity is all of the things that the mainstream fears, right? One of the things that horror has been doing a lot of recently, both in literature and in film, is actually telling the horror stories, the fear, right, from the perspective of the repressed. And so you're saying, like, so what do Black people fear? Black people fear white people, right? Black people fear racial violence, fear that giving children candy is going to result in them being murdered by police. One of the things that Candyman did really well is the moments when you hear those police sirens. And there's a great scene where I think Anthony is walking through the remains of Cabrini Green. And there's a police siren, and he immediately backs up.
Yep.
He immediately tries to conceal himself. And it's a very small moment, but it's so effective because you're like, yes, the fear is not coming into contact with a vengeful ghost. The fear is the police officers who might shoot you for walking down the street. And that, I think the film does that very well, but there's a lot of films recently that have been actually addressing that fear at the end of Get Out, when you see you hear the sirens, you see the police lights, and you're like, oh my God, the cops are coming, right? It's no longer, thank God the cops are coming, which is what you usually get in films told from a white perspective. It's, oh no, everybody's gonna die.
Yeah. Well, and that's what's so great about seeing filmmakers, like Black filmmakers, getting to tell these Black stories, is the fact that then you understand that. So for me, watching Candyman and getting to that moment when, what you're describing, when he's wandering through the part of the town and then the cop shows up, because I understood where it was going and I understood the context of this film, I was able to like put myself in his shoes and want him to not be seen by the cops either. Like, I'm instantly on his side there. It's not it's not thinking like, oh, well, why is he afraid of the police, whereas if a white person were trying to tell that story, it would have come through very differently.
Yeah. Well, and I think that we see something similar without, I don't want to go into Malignant spoilers, but it's so tempting. But I think we see something similar in Malignant where, again, if you've watched giallo films, if you're aware of the subgenre, and if you're aware of the genre of slasher films generally, where you've got this victimized woman, right? The haunted woman, this woman who's dealing with, am I crazy? Am I actually being followed by a killer? Am I being followed by a ghost? What's happening? That a lot of those are told, again, from a much more masculine perspective. Whereas I think Malignant is actually told from a feminine perspective in a lot of ways. And it's saying, like, this is about a woman being afraid of the things that are happening in her own head, the things that are happening to her surroundings, and you're being placed in the position not of a viewer of the victim, but of the victim herself, and seeing how she reacts to some of these things. Yeah.
Are there any other examples you wanted to talk about?
In terms of genre, or
like we could pick any genre and have this same conversation,
Definitely. I think that it's worthwhile for every critic to kind of have at least a working knowledge of the genre that they're looking at. So, if you're reviewing a horror film and you're like, I don't know anything about horror, maybe go find out things about horror, and particularly what the referentiality is, because it's really obvious when critics are talking about a film, just like, I don't understand why they did this. Just like, maybe that's because you don't actually know that this is a mystery movie.
Right, yeah.
Or that this is a slasher film,
Yeah, exactly. Well, like, last week I saw the movie The Card Counter, and which is the new Paul Schrader film. And this is the movie where I was just like, yeah, he definitely, kind of the opposite of Mason's question earlier, as far as directors who should not necessarily write their own screenplays. Paul Schrader needs to stop directing his own movies. He's not a great director. He's an okay writer and sometimes really good, but he's not a good director. And the card counter is just like kind of the latest example of that. And this is a film where it's on the widest level possible. It's sort of it's a thriller. That's what it wants to be. and drilling down a little bit, it's a revenge thriller. That's the movie that he thinks that he's making. It doesn't really work for that, and there are a lot of reasons why, but it's important to understand that, so that when certain elements happen, when Oscar Isaac, the main character, makes certain decisions based on things that you learn about from his past, it's important to understand, at the core, Paul Schrader thinks that he's making a revenge thriller. And then from there you can decide if it works as a revenge thriller or not. I don't think it does, because I don't think that those moments are earned. But understanding how a film like that is supposed to work is part of how you know if it's actually working or not.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. No, I agree with that. I think that, yeah, but when it comes down to it, what we're talking about is knowing what a film is supposed to be doing, as opposed to just complaining that it's not doing the thing that you wanted it to do.
Yeah, like, for this film specifically, I mean, it's 20 minutes before you even get introduced to the idea of where this might be going at all, which is a long time, especially in a movie that's under 2 hours. But basically, this is a story about a guy who used to be in the military. He was an interrogator, quote unquote. Really, he was, he tortured people in the military. And this is a post 9/11 story. And he ended up in prison because of his actions. And now he has turned to, he learned to count cards while he was in prison. Doesn't really use that skill. It's a movie about poker, but that's neither here nor there. And he meets someone along the way who was impacted by the things that happened, not by anything he specifically did, but he meets someone who is the son of someone else that he served with. And so then that sets off this chain of events. And so the problem is that Schrader tries to take this very, slow, approach and kind of wander into this revenge element. But why it doesn't work is because, first of all, yeah, it's called the card counter and he's not really counting cards. So I don't really understand that. But also it's like, is this a drama? Is it trying to be a romance? Is it a story about a guy mentoring a kid who needs some guidance? He can't really figure out what kind of story he's trying to tell. He knows where he wants to go, but he just really struggles with how to get there. Schrader, I mean. And so it tries to be too many things, and as a result, doesn't ever accomplish the main thing that it is.
And so that's a good example of just a failure of the genre, of a failure of a film, a failure being like this, I know what you're trying to do, but you're not doing it, Exactly. That's basically what it comes down to. So it's not saying like you made a crime movie when I expected you to make a Western. It's more like you made, I know what you were making, but you didn't do it.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So, and this is why when film, I'm really glad the Academy hasn't gone this route, but this is why when film awards, movie and TV awards, try to break things down by comedy and drama, that doesn't work. That's too limiting. If you're gonna break it down by different types of films, then you really need to expand that and include genres, because drama and comedy are not sufficient.
Yeah.
I personally think get rid of that and just celebrate great movies, because there's lots of great films, but like two of my favorite movies this year are Pig and Barb and Star go to Vista Del Mar. You can't get two films that are any more different, but they're both so great for such different reasons.
I like that. Pig and Barb and Star.
Yeah. I contain multitudes. Well, let's talk about another film that kind of blends some genres together.
Yeah.
That is one that I finally watched yesterday. Nightmare Alley, and we got a trailer for the new Guillermo del Toro update that's coming in December, I believe. So,
yeah,
Nightmare Alley. From a title like that has a nightmare in it, I did not know what to expect. I really had never, because I hadn't seen it before, so I really didn't know much. People were saying it was this great noir. The synopsis on IMDb just says the rise and fall of Stanton Carlyle, a mentalist whose lies and deceit prove to be his downfall, and it's got nightmare in the title. So I was thinking like, ooh, cool 1940s like kind of horror story. It's not that. It's really not. It's very good, and it definitely is a cool noir, but it's the genre elements of it are an interesting mix that I was not prepared for. So, like, it's really more of a focus on that rise and fall, and then it's got a little bit of like crime thrown in, and because you've got some what's the word?
Illegal shit going down.
Well, that too, but no, I'm talking like oh my gosh, I'm like, it's the dumbest word that I'm blanking on, but like he gets some
I honestly have no idea what you're thinking of.
Oh my gosh, like I'm gonna feel so stupid when I remember what word it is, but like not crisscrossed. He gets
double-crossed.
Double-crossed.
There we go.
Yeah.
All
like,
right.
There's double-crossing happening. There's accidental, involuntary murders happening. Like, it's not really murder, but guilt. There's all kinds of stuff that goes into this. So it's one that definitely blends genre elements together.
Yeah, I mean, I think that if you know, I were to categorize this, I'd be like, well, it's a psychological thriller. Like, that's kind of where it goes, because a lot of it is about his psychology, particularly.
Mm-hmm, definitely.
And the reason why he does what he does and why he makes the choices that he does. And there is some horror kind of mixed into that. This is one of those films, I was watching it again yesterday because I love it. And I was like, man, I really wish that this book and this film could have come out in like 1931 so that Todd Browning could have directed this, because it has, you know, and Browning was himself, he was he worked with a carnival. I think he was a carnival barker for a while. So there's definitely those elements of kind of what is being shown, what isn't, that sort of topsy-turvy sort of world that is kind of off kilter and no one is you know, normal, I guess, in this film. Everybody kind of has an angle, but I don't know, I mean, I kind of just wanted to force you to watch it because I love it. But it is an interesting film, even with some of the issues that they had with the code. Obviously they had to change certain things. And it's kind of obvious where they had to change them. Mm-hmm. But the sort of perversity of it, because it really is this looking into this man's psychology and not being able to come to a conclusion completely. Yeah.
And I think that was one of the things that I found the most intriguing, was like, am I supposed to sympathize with him, or am I supposed to just say, well, he brought all this on himself? And I love that. I love that it's not clear cut, and there are some very interesting ways. I don't want to spoil it because I'm sure that the new film is gonna, for anybody who hasn't seen this, I'm sure the new film is gonna do pretty well with it too, because I mean, it's Guillermo del Toro and he's such a fascinating storyteller. But I'm really interested to see where the two films will differ, and wondering if he's going to make it more of a horror story, or if he's going to stay pretty faithful to the source material. I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's I mean, I think there are a couple of big changes to the novel. This was originally a novel, which was supposedly very heavily based upon the author's own experiences in the carnival. But there are a couple of very big changes that the film makes, and I think that a lot of it has to do simply with the code. There are certain things that they can't show, certain conclusions that they can't come to because the code really wouldn't let them. But even with that, you've got Tyrone Power, who's such a charming leading man.
He really is.
Particularly at that point, and he's so, at best, he's amoral in this film. And really, most of the time, he's immoral. And he's almost, there comes a point in the movie where you feel like he's basically arguing against himself. He's conning himself into believing that what he's doing is okay. And that I find really interesting as well.
Especially because he also has the capacity for morality and for guilt, and because he is burdened by things that happened in the past too, and so it's like those things exist in him. He's not just he's not just like this kind of monstrous, likable con man, but who really doesn't give a crap about anybody else. He's not like that.
No, and in fact, I think that Lilith, the psychiatrist character, at one point says to him that she's like, well, you seem to be a pretty normal human being. You are ruthless and greedy when you're trying to get what you want, and kind and generous when you have it. Yeah. And I think that that's kind of a good, and it's sort of a dark view of humanity, definitely. But I think that that's kind of a good sort of encapsulation of his character in a lot of ways, that he is capable of kindness. He is capable of trying to do the right thing, as it were, but also is constantly pushing to have more. And that is, and that's ultimately what his downfall is. But he gets it by conning people, by chicanery, by lying, essentially, and even lying to himself and lying to the people that he works with. Yeah, so I am very intrigued by where Del Toro is actually going to go with this, because one of the things that I like about the original film is that there is this undercurrent of like kind of perverted obsession, right? And it's somewhat sexual, but also somewhat just supernatural almost, that even at one point, I think the Stanton character says, I don't know why I do the things that I do. But he keeps on doing them, and he even knows that in some places that what he's doing is wrong, but he keeps on doing it. It's like he's got this obsessive drive to fool people, to destroy people, essentially.
Yeah, exactly. And what's interesting is that it really all builds into a character that works really well and that is really fascinating to watch. It's not someone that you're like, oh, I don't want to root for that guy. It's actually, in some ways, the opposite. So. Yeah,
you get conned by him. You like him despite himself.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is, I think a lot of that, I will be interested to see whether Bradley Cooper can pull this off, who's, I don't think as charming and likable a leading man to begin with. But
I felt like he used to be. I don't know what happened to him. I really don't.
But yeah, you like Tyrone Power, like, and he, at that time, that was kind of at the height of his career, where he was this great leading man. It's kind of like having Cary Grant play that role.
Yeah.
Or Chris Hemsworth, He's just like, oh, but he's so likable.
Yeah. So it's I loved it. It is, if you were to happen to be on certain open streaming platforms that don't require subscriptions, you would probably be able to find it. It's on YouTube, guys. You can watch it on YouTube. but I loved it, so it's also on Criterion. It's not streaming on Criterion Channel right now, but I'm definitely gonna buy the Criterion edition because I really want to dive in more to the film. And yeah, but it's definitely worth a watch. The version I watched on YouTube was actually pretty good. I could see the whole thing. I could hear it just fine, which you never know what you're gonna get on stuff like that. But anyway, definitely worth the watch. And yeah, I don't know. I'm excited for the new one simply because it's Guillermo del Toro. I love him. I love his filmmaking. So
I think that most people are excited because it's just Guillermo del Toro, and I really am interested in what he does with this story.
I suspect most people are excited for similar reasons that I was. Now that I know the story, it's a little different, but Guillermo del Toro in a movie with nightmare in the title.
Also, I like, and I've said this a couple of times on Twitter, like, I cannot wait to see Cate Blanchett in the role that she plays.
Oh,
like,
yeah,
I am really looking forward to that.
It's gonna be amazing. Yeah. So, let's see. Nightmare Alley. I was just looking to see what the release date is. It is soon. December. Wait, that's Argentina. That doesn't help us. December 17th is when it will be out in the United States.
Goody. Just in time for Christmas.
That's right. Take your whole family on Christmas Day. Only if you're vaccinated. Anyway. Yeah. I mean, this cast is amazing. Cate Blanchett, Willem Dafoe, Bradley Cooper, Mary Steenburgen, Rooney Mara, Ron Perlman, Toni Collette. David Strathairn, Tim Blake Nelson. Seeing some of these folks as Carnies is going to be really fun. So, anyway. Anything else? Any final thoughts? Any movies that you plan on watching this upcoming week?
I'm trying to think. Well, I should be covering some films out of New York Film Festival, which has press screenings starting. I am not going to be going in person because I'm just not comfortable with it, and I don't like the fact that there are a lot of people coming from out of state, including from places like Texas, to New York City, where we're actually got a lot of this under control. Please, everybody, if you're coming, remember that if you're indoors, you have to be vaccinated. That's like a rule now in New York City. If in order to go into restaurants and movie theaters and stuff like that, you must present a vaccination card. Mm-hmm. This isn't an option. So I am going to be trying to get up some films and get up some reviews of films out of New York Film Festival.
Cool. Very cool. I'm not really sure what I'm watching this week, but I'm sure it'll be fun. I'm really excited because Real Housewives of Salt Lake City came back, and that shows all sorts of genre chaos. Even though it's a reality show, it's got crime this season and lots of drama. I love it. It's such a yeah. It starts off the very first episode of this season, and I already had known this has happened because I'm kind of following along what's been going on. But it starts off with one of the main people getting arrested, so it's like this is gonna be a good season. I can't wait. So yeah, I've never watched a Real Housewives show until Salt Lake City, and I just can't get enough. It's not enough to make me want to watch any of the others, but I'm all in on this one. So, yeah. Anyway, well, thank you for joining us for our genre discussion. We would love to hear some of your thoughts as well, and there's lots of ways that you can do that. So, we would like to thank our patrons who help make the show possible. That is Adriana, Ali, Heather, James, Kathleen, Carriata, Mason, Matt, Matthew, Michelle, Monty, Nanina, Robert, Steve, Sharon, Tao, and Will. If you would like to join them and become a patron yourself, that's patreon.com/CitizenDame. And you can support the show that way. We have our Zazzle store. updates are coming. They're not there. We keep saying that, but we promise they're coming. That's Zazzle.com/CitizenDamePod, and our Ko-Fi is ko-fi.com/CitizenDame. You can also contact us. We love it. We do have our website, CitizenDamePod.com, which is where Lauren's reviews from NYFF will be coming. I've got some stuff that's going to be there soon, too. And you can reach us by email if you're not into the social medias. That is citizendamepod@gmail.com. But if you are on social media, we are on Twitter and Instagram @CitizenDamePod and Letterboxd @CitizenDame, where we've got some fun lists and we'll be adding more genre-specific stuff in the upcoming week. But you can also find us individually. Lauren, where are you?
I am on Twitter, Instagram, and Letterboxd @LHBusiness.
And I am on Twitter, Instagram, and Letterboxd @Karen M. Peterson. So thanks so much for listening, and we will catch you next time.
Bye.
And the legend is, if you say his name 5 times while looking in the mirror, he appears in the reflection and kills you. So I thought that we could...
What did you think?
Summon him.
Hell no. No.
Candyman.
Anthony.
Candyman.
Anthony, no.
Candyman.
Stop. Stop it.
Candyman.
Stop it.
Okay.
You better not do
Okay,
that.
okay, okay. Candyman.
See, you play too much. You